Deep within Africa, there's a mystery unfolding, a story tangled up in oil, power, and a big-named corporation. Now, you might wonder, how did a company that was once seen as a beacon of advancement become such a hotbed of controversy in Nigeria? What really happened behind the scenes to stir up such a storm of environmental, human rights, and corruption accusations? Well, buckle up and get ready to dive into the twisted tale of Shell in Nigeria. It's a story that's brimming with surprises. It all began in the later years of the 19th century, when there was this guy in London named Marcus Samuel. One day, he started bringing in kerosene from Russia to sell in the Far East. He was an avid seashell collector, so he decided to name his new venture after his beloved hobby. Now, Marcus had two sons, Marcus Jr. and Samuel. They had a grand vision of revolutionizing the industry by bringing the world's first oil tankers and setting up a comprehensive network of storage tanks and distribution depots all over Asia, and so they did. Now, while all of this was happening, something else was brewing over in the Netherlands. In the year 1890, a guy named Jean Kessler, along with a team of Dutch investors, set up a company. They called it the Royal Dutch Company for the exploration of petroleum wells, and they focused on the Dutch East Indies, what we now call Indonesia. But things weren't exactly smooth sailing for them. They had a formidable rival in the form of Standard Oil and others, and were having a tough time finding enough oil to keep up with the demand that was skyrocketing at the time. In the year 1896, they brought on board a man named Henry Deterding, and under his stewardship, Royal Dutch turned into a formidable global player. In 1903, Royal Dutch and Shell decided to join hands, at least in terms of marketing and transport. The collaboration was so successful that by 1907, Royal Dutch and Shell had made a monumentous decision. They decided to merge their operations into one single entity, and so the Royal Dutch Shell Group was born. Their combined production was over 200,000 barrels per day, which gave them a market share of more than 10%. Following this historic merger, the newly formed entity went for an intriguing structure. It became a dual-listed company, essentially meaning it had two parent companies, each owning an equal stake in a shared operating company. Shell quickly carved out a prominent place for itself in the oil industry, standing toe-to-toe with giants like Standard Oil and other heavyweights. As the world descended into the chaos of the First World War between 1914 and 18, Shell emerged as a significant player. It became the primary fuel supplier for the British Expeditionary Force. Aviation fuel? That was Shell's territory too. And TNT for the British Army? Shell provided a staggering 80% of it. The company even offered all of its shipping resources to the British Admiralty. Such immense contributions to the war effort didn't go unnoticed. King George V himself recognized Shell's services, granting it a royal warrant in 1915. As the years rolled on, Shell found itself up against an increasingly complex set of challenges. The game was changing, and Shell needed to keep up. In the face of such tumult, Shell turned to what it knew best: adaptation and innovation. In their quest for adaptation, they looked for different places with low costs, and one such place was Africa. And so Shell began its operations there. Shell's move into Nigeria, initially filled with promise and potential, quickly became fraught with problems. Shell had been accused of causing extensive oil spills and flaring gas, a practice with substantial environmental consequences. Shell found itself in the eye of a storm in the 1990s during what came to be known as the Ogoni crisis. Shell has also been linked to thousands of oil spills in the Niger Delta. These spills didn't just cause environmental damage, they polluted the very life sources of millions of people. The land, the water, the air, all tainted by the aftermath of these spills. If you look at the data from Amnesty International, between 2007 and 17 alone, Shell reported over 1,800 spills from their pipelines and wells in Nigeria. This amounts to more than 110,000 barrels of oil. But here's the thing, these figures could just be the tip of the iceberg. Shell has a tendency to blame these spills on sabotage or theft, but independent investigations often tell a different story. They point to corrosion, poor maintenance, and equipment failures as the real culprits. The response to these spills has also been far from adequate. Cleanup operations have often been slow and ineffective, leaving many areas contaminated for years, even decades. In 2011, a report by the UN Environment Programme, or UNEP, found that the oil pollution in Ogoniland had reached a point where it was considered a public health emergency. The report estimated that it would take 30 years and $1 billion to restore the environment. Shell's operations in Nigeria have also led to another significant environmental issue: gas flaring. If you're not familiar with the term, gas flaring is essentially the act of burning off surplus natural gas that comes out along with oil during extraction. The implications of gas flaring are manifold. It contributes to climate change, releasing greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. But the impact isn't just on a global scale. Gas flaring also causes local air pollution, emitting substances like nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxide, volatile organic compounds, and particulate matter, all of which are harmful to health. Local communities bear the brunt of this. They're exposed to noise, heat, acid rain, and health risks, and while all of this happens, a valuable resource is being wasted, a resource that could have been used for power generation or even domestic consumption. However, the controversies surrounding Shell's operations in Nigeria aren't just environmental. Shell has been accused of violating or being complicit in violations of the human rights of the Niger Delta's people. This includes the right to a healthy environment, an adequate standard of living, health, food, water, and even the right to life itself. Particularly at risk are the indigenous people of the Niger Delta, like the Ogoni, the Ijaw, and the Urhobo. These communities have been marginalized and discriminated against not just by the Nigerian government, but also by oil companies, including Shell. One particularly notorious case from the mid-90s involved the execution of 9 Ogoni activists, including Ken Saro-Wiwa. The military tribunal responsible for the execution was widely criticized as unfair and politically motivated. Shell was implicated in these proceedings, with allegations suggesting they may have influenced the trial and the verdict. They were also accused of providing logistical and financial assistance to the security forces committing human rights violations in Ogoniland. In 2009, Shell agreed to pay $15.5 million to settle a lawsuit built by the families of these executed activists in a US court. However, the controversies and allegations surrounding Shell's operations in Nigeria remain a dark and prominent part of the company's history. As if the environmental and human rights controversies weren't enough, corruption allegations have also been a dark cloud over Shell's operations in Nigeria. The company has been accused of paying bribes to Nigerian officials, politicians, and intermediaries. The objective: to secure oil contracts, licenses, permits, and tax breaks. There have also been allegations of Shell inflating its oil production figures, underreporting oil spills, and dodging taxes. Recently, in February 2021, the UK Supreme Court made a landmark ruling. 2 communities in Nigeria, Ogale and Bile, have been given the green light to sue Shell in English courts over ongoing oil pollution. The communities argue that Shell should be held responsible for the environmental damage caused by its Nigerian subsidiary, the Shell Petroleum Development Company of Nigeria Limited, or SPDC. And more recently, in June 2023, an oil spill from the Trans-Niger pipeline operated by SPDC affected several communities in Bayelsa State. While SPDC claimed to have taken immediate action to contain the spill, some locals and activists accused the company of negligence and downplaying the spill's extent. It's clear that Shell's story in Nigeria is far from over, and the road ahead remains filled with challenges. Do you think Nigeria will find justice, or will Shell fix its ways? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.